Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and welcome to episode 195, where this week I'm going to be reviewing the first half of Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 2, the TV series on Apple TV Plus that fills out the lore of the Warner Brothers legendary Monsterverse. So as this is a TV review, there will be full spoilers, so if you haven't had a chance yet to watch episodes 1 through 5, you have been warned. And then to end the episode, I will be responding to listener mail and question of the week responses. Timecodes are listed in the episode description should you want to hop around. Now let's return to the Monsterverse with Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 2, Part 1.
We gotta go back.
This is the only way. We have to go. Don't make a sound.
Having only reviewed Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, context I think is relevant, especially if you haven't listened to my Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 1 thoughts with friend of the show Rob Keyes. I love this show, particularly for its production design, its special effects, and actually telling interesting stories within this Monsterverse world. The movies have gone on too long, becoming what I dubbed to be suffering from the same problem as the Transformers franchise or other franchises like Fast and Furious, but Monarch Legacy of Monsters creates characters that you care about and relationships, while sometimes that can feel somewhat soap opera in their nature. At least the investment and the time is spent to explore their relationships as well as their impact to the world of Legacy of Monsters. And you get that through Season 1, and Season 2 is really interesting for the fact that it completely shifts all of the dynamics up by bringing characters back and shifting things from where they were in the previous season. That is, we finally get Kaiko brought into the present, and she's dealing with a lot of what we saw from Shaw in the first season, but automatically this season just inherently is different because of this person that you spent the entire first season falling in love with, and her relationships with Bill and Lee in the first season, their origins that led to Monarch, and where they are now. And one aspect that I do find confusing but interesting, just based on how this monster world has evolved, is we are now building up to Godzilla King of Monsters and Godzilla X or V Kong, where that we ultimately got Godzilla and Mechagodzilla. And it's funny to me watching this season in particular because you see breadcrumbs here and there about what led Apex to doing what they do when it comes to dealing with the Titans. And this world within the Monarch Legacy of Monsters show is so much more grounded, at least in its nature, in which we explore what the Titans mean for the overall universe. It's funny that the leap was then made in Godzilla versus Kong, but of course this television series, it's potentially going to be going there at this current point. We don't know if there's going to be a third season. It would be interesting to see if another one of these seasons leads directly into a film, because of course, as I've said, we're in that middle ground. But the changing in the ensemble and the way that that shifts the story really does add an impact to the origins of Monarch. Lee Shaw in that first season is kind of a wild cowboy, and you're of course seeing the three of them when they were younger. And I was nervous going into this season because with Kaiko coming back, is this essentially going to sort of wet blanket the wild card that was Lee Shaw, and losing him at the end of the first season, at least the way that it was set up, I was under the assumption that we're going to be spending the exact same amount of time, whether that be half the season or the whole season, trying to get him back. Thankfully, it's dealt with in the first episode, and similar to the first season, we get a Kong in this season as opposed to Godzilla. It's nice getting to share focus with our main two titans are within the universe, exploring the, even though it has been debunked, alpha mentality when it comes to the way that these creatures are reacting in the world, and the otherworldness is only really used to help explain how characters can be alive or have not have aged in experiencing their time in the inside of the earth, which is, even though the show is much more grounded than the films has been, the most science fiction element, where there is an inside earth near the core of the planet, and then we have the regular earth, and exploring what these threats have meant for the world as a whole, still really reeling from the events of San Francisco in 2014, but each character having gone through their journey in the first season. In this second season, everyone is very much more on the back foot. We're not dealing with the consequences of Godzilla and just sort of trying to solve the mystery. Each of the flashbacks in this season, as well as what we deal with in the present, is specifically looking at how to deal with what is the current threat. Not an overarching, we need to find answers for something, and we get all the backstory of this Titan, which I did appreciate. It was interesting because the whole first season leads to how Kaiko disappears, and we get, as I said, the origins for those two characters, or the three characters and Monarch. But season 2 addresses all of those hurdles that people have within their own relationships, whether that be heroes, two families, or the love triangle that Bill, Lee, and Kaiko had throughout the 50s and the 60s. What led Bill to becoming that solo person, leaving Hero to be on his own with his grandparents, and eventually becoming John Goodman? I'm incredibly curious. We have 5 episodes left. Well, we've teased why he goes out and does those things. I'm curious because we did have a John Goodman cameo in the first season, if we are actually going to see more of Skull Island, because regardless of how much we've used him in Godzilla v Kong and Godzilla X Kong, and there allegedly is going to be a third one of these films. I mean, whether that happens or not, I'm very curious. They have done very well, so I'm not sure if we're going to be getting that third film. It looks like it's currently slated for next year, but I guess we're just going to do what this franchise has done, which is constantly replace all of the human characters. And what's so funny is looking at the films and now 1.5 seasons of the television series, is when you bother to invest in the human characters and show how they are fundamentally important to the story as a whole, as opposed to just sort of having random name actors that can be charismatic and react to big CGI monsters. And that is something that has to be commended for the show, which is the use of special effects has to be considered some of the best in streaming, period. It is astounding to me that on a television show budget, we are getting movie quality versions of the Titans, specifically, of course, Godzilla and Kong, because we've seen them in multiple films. Well, obviously Godzilla's had more, and Kong has been what will be now a trilogy of Godzilla, blank letter, and then Kong. But those characters and how they are important to, whether that be controlling the Titans, defending the Earth from the Titans, and getting to see how Monarch has shifted in the time since its origins to where it is now, and how Apex, as this shadowy organization, has tried to take over, and you can see the developing nature that leads ultimately to Mechagodzilla in Godzilla v Kong, which again, it is funny the way that this franchise has evolved. It still feels quite extreme that we wind up getting there. In Godzilla versus Kong, it feels like a massive step forward in terms of a lack of believability and a science fiction level that obviously I am aware of what the Toho elements have been and what we got from all of the different monsters. Mechagodzilla may be outside of, I'm changing what I'm thinking, which is he's probably the most iconic Godzilla bad guy to the general public. Of course, if you're a big fan of the Toho stuff, you are familiar with all the other monsters, Mothra, King Ghidorah, and I know there's many more. I haven't seen all of the classic films, but this show's exploration of the impact of the Titans to real people on the ground. It's ironic coming off of Daredevil Born Again season 2, where those shows within the Netflix era and now 2 seasons into Daredevil Born Again show the impact of effectively telling a story with somebody who is on the ground floor. They are, of course, in this grand problem that is dealing with the Titans and whether they're going to battle and destroy Earth or just sort of doing their own thing in the way that human beings choose to react to what's going on around them. But the unveiling of the relationship in the way that people were connected, and Hero specifically having a mirror placed upon him, seeing that his mother was not too dissimilar from the way that he's acted as an adult, while could be absolutely comprised of melodrama, is used really effectively to show that even though he has missed his mom for so many years, most of his life, that there's things that through fate or destiny have connected who they are as people. And the fact that you have time for that within this series is really commendable, because yes, the giant monsters are exciting, and it is funny that this is a franchise that is baked in all of that. It is called the Monster Universe. But if those quieter moments within this show of the two characters finding connection, having struggles, trying to overcome them for an improved relationship, making up for a lack of time. I think the conversation that Lee has with Hero in episode 5 is the most important in the whole series, because we've seen through the flashbacks the relationship that Lee and Bill had with Kaiko in the ways that it was different, also in the ways that it was similar, and the choices that they make and what ultimately leads to what brings Lee and Kaiko together physically in season 2. And without knowing any of those things, Hero has acted in a very similar fashion, which is one of the major conflicts of season 1. He has 2 families. What led him to do that? And if we do get a 3rd season, or potentially if we continue through this through line in season 2, are we going to see that from Hero? He's somebody who unknowingly has done something that, even though he is hurt by the decisions that his own mother has made, that likely led to him being abandoned by his stepfather, why did he do those things? Unconsciously, he's obviously done something very similar, and he's coming to the realization that him and his mom might not be that different, but that relationship being the most important, because Hero has struggled with his own connection to the 2 kids he's had with completely different women who are on opposite ends of the earth. That story and those characters and the way that they go through their own personal struggles have to be interesting, or the show doesn't work. And it does. These characters having the quieter moments with each other, seeing what they've been through, even when the Earth, or maybe somewhat smaller for the cataclysmic event that could be happening in front of them, that these things have to be done. And I really appreciated that Lee, somebody who has quite literally lost it all, had the opportunity to have it come back. Kaiko comes back even younger, and of course, he had his own journey through the center of the earth, but he's now much older, at least chronologically, than he would be if he had not had that experience. Knowing Hero as he did when he was a child, saying, hey, you have an opportunity that most people don't have. And these characters being so distracted by the mission at hand, and the way that the monster is integrated into this season, I do really like. It's not just we're looking for things, but the monster in this season, I guess Titan, use more correct terminology. The Titan in this season and the way that it narratively flows, pun intended, or swims through the season was really interesting, because I was initially concerned the way that they were going to use the flashbacks, because the most interesting part of season 1 is the origins of Monarch and how they lose Kaiko. And then in season 2, we know how she disappeared, but using those flashbacks more meaningfully to fill out the story was fantastic. And I really like the way that they use them in this season. and even giving us flashbacks with the present day characters and the way that those characters interacted. Bill Randa, of course, was introduced to us cinematically in Kong Skull Island, and the first season showed us that he was aware that he was likely going to die on that island, and the information that he had collected throughout his journeys and the significance that it would serve for Monarch's history and capabilities when it came to understanding the Titans, and the way that it comes to a head, particularly in season 5, that all this information was brought to Hero, and a willingness to want to ignore it because of how he felt emotionally betrayed by Bill being left to live with his grandparents, no longer having any family after Keiko disappeared and Bill went on his journey of collecting information, only for that to be presented to him when they eventually break into Apex. All of this story is smart and it's effective when they present something that's going to cause a character to have a significant emotional reaction. You, of course, have the grandeur of the Titans and the tracking behind them, and I like we get to see elements of Monarch and Apex sort of working together, but then sort of not. Both companies or organizations have such different ideologies when it comes to dealing with the Titans, and seeing the breadcrumbs being laid here of how Apex is that shadowy organization that we can't trust them, and Monarch hopefully becomes the company or the organization that Bill, Lee, and Keiko wanted it to be, being faced with a Titan and even acknowledging the legacy of what happened in the first Godzilla with Let Them Fight, and ultimately what happened to San Francisco. Even if that might have been good for humanity in the long run, it is looked at as a cataclysmic event, as it is. But this season with the aquatic, weird crab Titan and getting to see the two organizations go head to head, evaluating how they are going to either protect humanity, live with the Titans, take over the Titan, all of the Easter eggs that are going to lead to inevitably, as I've said so many times, Mechagodzilla. Really interesting stuff, and grounding it in a way that feels much more like there is connective tissue there, as opposed to the massive leap that it was within the films. I'm glad that this show exists. The best way that I could sort of wrap up my feelings on the first half of Monarch Legacy of Monster Season 2 is there's been this mentality lately where younger millennials are having a new formed perspective when it comes to evaluating the Star Wars prequels, which I find hilarious, being an older millennial and having grown up with them as well, but also growing up with the original trilogy, that we were too critical. And what's impossible to remove now within the lore of Star Wars is you had 7 seasons of an incredible television series called The Clone Wars that completely recontextualizes all of the moments that people might think are rushed or forced within the 3 prequel films. And that is sort of the case here, where I'm not nostalgic at all for the Monsterverse movies, but the way in which we are able to expand this universe, filling in details that weren't addressed at all, is really, really entertaining. But it's also just gripping to see what can happen when the screenwriters and the showrunners and everybody is given the time to tell a way more interesting story that's not just big monster fights. Now, the show has those, and I like that stuff, but the cat and mouse game of it all is maybe my favorite element, on top of the fact that I thoroughly love the characters, as I've stated for almost 20 minutes now. I'm really looking forward to the remaining 5 episodes. I think the groundwork in the first 5 is really interesting and builds so much on the first season. It's rare for shows to just feel like it's a building block, as opposed to we're just telling a new season of television, where you put so much into the foundation of the show in its flashbacks and its present day stuff that we now have a springboard to going into the other films and connecting them this way. I'm curious if this season's going to have any more time jumps. It would be, I think it would be really cool to see what does this show's perspective on Godzilla vs. Kong look like, but who knows now because we're right now around the Godzilla King of Monsters era. That will do it for my thoughts on the first 5 or part 1 of Monarch Legacy of Monsters. If you're watching the show, make sure to let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Now let's get to listener mail and question of the week responses.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, what film or how were you introduced to Godzilla? We got a bunch of answers that had to touch on all sorts of things. So the first comes from Dylan Pollock. I think my first Godzilla, like a lot of us Americans, is the 1998 Matthew Broderick version. For better or worse, it did some popularizing of the character here in America. Probably for the best. I can say every other Godzilla movie I've watched is better, all with its flaws. Roland Emmerich's Godzilla is still entertaining. Scotty, I love you so much. Thank you for this. So commented on every episode within the last week. So on to Daredevil Born Again. He says, great episode. I plan on watching Born Again Season 2 premiere after I can catch up on the first 4 of Invincible. I'm a huge fan of the street level side of the MCU, particularly Daredevil and Punisher, because those characters are vigilantes like Batman. Dare I say Daredevil is the closest Marvel character to Batman without outright pastiche like Nighthawk. Yes, Iron Man is a billionaire, but he's not a vigilante driven by childhood trauma like Daredevil. And then to connect to the Godzilla stuff, Scotty says, I always provide a novel answer first before adding a graphic novel. To swat down any gatekeepers, I will say Hero.com novel series is criminally underrated. As for Oblivion Song, there's presumably a film in the works. To question of the week. The first Godzilla movie I saw was the crappy Roland Emmerich one from 1998. That film came out the year I was born. Oh, Scotty, you're making me feel old. The most entertaining part is seeing Barney on TV as Godzilla destroys New York City. I played the Godzilla game, Save the Earth, prior to seeing that film. Okay. And then to our Invincible episode. Great episode. I'm glad to see Kyle's faith in the show effectively restored. As someone who read the comics, I've been pleased with the current season, having seen the first 2 episodes of the current season, and I'm pleased with how Mark's dark side has been handled as well as Nolan's redemption arc. I also love the inclusion of Captain Bakel and more of his crew getting names instead of just download. I do wish the moment of Alan saving Bakel's ship was used from the comics. And Scotty and I have had conversations. Scotty is obviously my most dedicated Star Trek listener, and I knew once I saw that stuff how much Scotty would like it, so I'm really happy to see he enjoyed that. And then we have a comment here from Legacy Odinson. I was sold on the visuals for Project Hail Mary from the very first preview I saw last year in the theater so strongly I planned to see it in IMAX and avoided every other subsequent piece of promotional material. I didn't even know about Rocky until the movie, and it was such a refreshing experience. I'm talking about going to see IMAX. It is quite a trek for me, but I'm going to do my best to make that happen. And then his question of the week answer. I'm ashamed to say the first Godzilla film I remember seeing was Zilla, which is what it's been dubbed by the Japanese, in 1998. Upon developing my frontal lobe, I did not see the other Godzilla movies until the Monsterverse and -1. I, of course, have given my thoughts on Godzilla -1, it is absolutely incredible, and I'm really looking forward to the next one, which I believe is called Godzilla -0. And like so many of us, of course, Godzilla from the 1990s was the first version of Godzilla I saw. Although I definitely have vague memories of clips from the first film, at least a scene of him walking into a power line. That's ingrained in my brain, and I've had an impossible time sort of remembering when that was, but it's just sort of stuck in there. Thank you to everybody who answered last week's question of the week. And I know what you're wondering now. What is this week's question of the week? As with next week, it is going to be a review of Super Mario Galaxy, the movie, and Mario wrapped in that for my millennials, as well as Gen X's, Gen Alphas, Gen Zs. Mario has been around for over 40 years and is not just a movie character, obviously much more than that, is a video game character. So my question for this week, what is your favorite Super Mario game? It can be a spin-off, like as an example, if you really love Dr. Mario, you can do that if you really want. But yes, that is the question of the week. To answer the question of the week, you can comment below within Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. You can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com, or you can @filmreelist on any of the social medias. Just make sure to include the hashtag QOTW. Thank you so much for listening to the Film Realist podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video as well as subscribe. We are so close to getting to that 500 subscriber mark. As of recording, we are at 488, so only 12 subscribers away. I would really love to get to that first step of that monetization process. It would allow me more opportunities for the podcast, which would be incredible. Regardless of reaching that milestone, the podcast will be here week by week, covering the biggest movies, TV shows, and then on the social media front, reacting to trailers and having my face make faces. I know people really enjoy them. Clearly, the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone TV series was one that people were interested in, and I make a lot of faces in that one. So if you're interested in seeing my face make faces, follow the Film Realist on any of the social medias. They're linked in the bio site for the podcast in the episode description. Thank you so much for listening to the Film Realist podcast. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next week.